Margaret, recently widowed at 63, never imagined that grief could come with such a strange mixture of emptiness and clarity. The house she had shared with her late husband Henry felt too quiet, the rooms echoing with memories she both cherished and struggled to bear. Yet, amidst the sorrow, a spark of determination began to grow, a desire to create something new, something joyful, something that could reshape her life and the lives of those she loved. One evening, while browsing real estate listings, Margaret's eyes landed on a Victorian mansion on Elm Street. 6 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, sunlit gardens, and intricate woodwork that whispered stories of elegance and history. It was a home that seemed to promise new beginnings. She imagined holiday dinners where laughter filled the air, summer barbecues with grandchildren running through the yard, and quiet afternoons sipping tea in the sun-drenched living room. The house was not just a building. It was hope, a fresh start, a way to turn the page after years of routine and loss. Driven by a mixture of intuition and longing, Margaret made a bold decision. She would buy the house in secret using Henry's life insurance money, keeping the purchase hidden from her son Kevin and daughter-in-law Rebecca. For 6 weeks, she poured herself into transforming the mansion into something perfect. Painters refreshed the walls with warm, inviting colors, floors were refinished to gleaming perfection, the kitchen was updated with modern appliances, and the gardens were carefully landscaped to bloom with life. Every choice, every detail was made with care, with love, and with the hope of creating a place where family could thrive together. Margaret imagined the moment she would finally reveal her surprise, picturing Kevin's astonishment, Rebecca's tears of joy, and the grandchildren's delight as they explored their new space. But deep down, she also knew that surprises carry a delicate risk. The reactions of others are never fully within your control, and even the best-laid plans can reveal unexpected truths about those closest to you. As the final touches were completed and the house gleamed under the late afternoon sun, Margaret felt a mix of anticipation and nervous excitement. She had a gift ready to share, a gesture meant to bring her family together, and yet she could sense that this story was about to unfold in ways she could never have predicted. If you love real life stories full of suspense, family dynamics, and lessons about trust and resilience, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any part of this journey. Margaret's story is about more than a house. It is about courage, love, and discovering how to protect what truly matters. And it all begins with a single secret decision that would change everything. Margaret had spent weeks imagining the joy on Kevin and Rebecca's faces when she finally handed them the keys to the mansion she had secretly purchased. Yet the reality that unfolded was far from what she had envisioned. On the morning she planned to reveal the house, she called Kevin to arrange a lunch, eager to share her surprise, only to hear a carefully measured tone in his voice that hinted at an agenda she had not anticipated. "Mom, Rebecca and I found a house that might be perfect for our family," he said, a casualness in his words that masked the tension she had not yet sensed. Her heart skipped, imagining another child or some other joyful development, but the next words revealed the truth. The house Kevin and Rebecca were talking about was the very mansion she had purchased, the one that had consumed her thoughts, her energy, and her savings for the past 6 weeks. The illusion of surprise quickly shifted to unease as Rebecca's voice chimed in, explaining that they were considering the property for multigenerational living, citing her parents' health needs and their desire for more space. And although she sounded concerned, the excitement in her voice betrayed a sense of entitlement that Margaret had not anticipated. Margaret's initial reaction was a mix of pride and caution. She could almost admire their enthusiasm, yet a growing sense of suspicion began to creep in. She realized that their visit was no longer a casual look at potential options. They were measuring, imagining, and planning as though the house already belonged to them, discussing furniture placement, the flow of the rooms, and how the gardens could be designed, while carefully dropping suggestions that nudged her toward using her inheritance to cover the down payment. As Kevin mentioned the supposed urgency of making a full cash offer before another family could swoop in, Margaret felt a cold realization settle over her. This was not a genuine conversation about needs and possibilities. It was an orchestrated attempt to pressure her, to manipulate her generosity into financing what they had no legal claim to. She listened carefully, watching their words and the subtle shifts in tone, noting how Rebecca referenced Henry's memory as a justification, framing the narrative to make Margaret feel guilty if she hesitated, implying that failing to act quickly would dishonor her late husband's wishes. The house, which Margaret had chosen as a gift out of love and anticipation, had been transformed in their minds into a tool for their own gain, and the careful, deliberate way they laid out their plan revealed months of premeditation, the kind that preys on trust and family loyalty. Margaret allowed them to give her the full tour, observing their reactions and noting the ease with which they assigned themselves ownership roles, imagining which room each person would take, and making comments about the smallest bedroom where they expected her to settle, all while presenting themselves as reasonable and concerned for the family's welfare. She realized that their excitement was not innocent. It was calculated, a mix of ambition and strategic thinking, intended to create a narrative where Margaret would feel compelled to act. The manipulation was subtle yet persistent, relying on psychological pressure rather than outright demands, careful references to what was in the family's best interest, hypothetical situations about other buyers, and a constant undercurrent of urgency that made her heart race and her mind evaluate every possible angle. As she listened to their plans and considered the implications of their words, she understood that the mansion she had purchased in secret had become a battleground, not of brick and mortar, but of trust and integrity, a space where familial bonds were being tested against desire and entitlement. Margaret's careful observations revealed the layers of manipulation: Kevin's soft insistence that the opportunity might slip away, Rebecca's feigned helplessness, and the repeated appeals to past generosity all worked in concert to create a scenario in which she would feel that not acting immediately would be a moral failure. It was in that tension-filled moment, standing in a house that was legally hers yet psychologically hijacked by those she loved, that Margaret began to fully grasp the precariousness of trust within families, and the way ambition can distort relationships when empathy is overshadowed by self-interest. She maintained a calm exterior, yet internally she was calculating her next move, weighing the consequences of confrontation against the need to protect her assets and her autonomy. The experience revealed a stark reality: generosity can be weaponized, and good intentions can be exploited by those who know how to manipulate emotions and fabricate urgency. Margaret's resolve began to solidify as she considered the broader lesson embedded in this intimate betrayal: the importance of vigilance, of observing actions rather than being swayed by words, and of understanding that love and obligation do not guarantee that others will act ethically, even within one's own family. In this tense dance of persuasion, Margaret realized that the mansion she had purchased was more than a house. It had become a test of character, a crucible in which she could measure the loyalty, honesty, and motives of those closest to her, and in that moment, she knew that the way forward required careful action, strategic patience, and an unwavering commitment to protect her own interests while navigating the delicate and often treacherous terrain of familial expectation. Margaret thought that once the initial confrontation with Kevin and Rebecca was over, she could breathe a little easier, yet the sense of unease that had settled in her chest only grew heavier over the following days. What began as subtle attempts at emotional manipulation soon escalated into a more alarming pattern, and it became increasingly clear that Rebecca had no intention of respecting the boundaries of a gift that was meant to be a loving surprise. Margaret had intended for the mansion to remain a personal sanctuary, a space where she could honor her late husband's memory while providing her son and daughter-in-law a gesture of familial love, but Rebecca's behavior turned that dream into a landscape of anxiety and betrayal. One afternoon, Margaret received a series of messages from neighbors and contractors who had seen Rebecca wandering through the property, speaking with the landscapers, and asking questions about renovation possibilities, all without Margaret's knowledge or consent. At first, she was stunned, assuming there must be some misunderstanding or a friendly tour gone awry, but when she went to investigate, she found evidence that could not be denied: doors unlocked that she had personally secured, lights left on in rooms she had not yet revealed, and personal items rearranged as if someone had assumed the house already belonged to them. The gravity of the situation hit Margaret in waves. The mansion was no longer a private symbol of love and careful planning, it had been infiltrated by premeditated deceit, a deliberate invasion of her space orchestrated by the very person she had hoped to welcome with warmth and joy. Rebecca's actions revealed a level of calculation that Margaret found deeply unsettling, as though every step had been considered in advance to give her the impression that the property was already a shared possession. Margaret recalled the earlier conversations where Rebecca had subtly suggested that the family needed to move quickly to secure a dream home, the urgency now taking on a more sinister tone, reinforced by the unauthorized access and casual assumption of entitlement. It was no longer a matter of gentle persuasion or emotional appeals. This was a conscious effort to bypass boundaries and manipulate reality, using boldness and secrecy to create an illusion of inevitability. Margaret began to notice patterns, Rebecca arriving at the mansion under the guise of checking on maintenance, wandering through the rooms with a sense of ownership, and even inviting friends or distant relatives to see the house, presenting it as if it were already hers, all while carefully omitting that the property legally belonged to Margaret. Each incident was layered with subtle psychological pressure, reinforcing the narrative that Margaret's hesitance or protective instincts were unreasonable, and that any attempt to intervene would seem harsh or selfish. The knowledge that Rebecca had taken these steps without permission crystallized a harsh reality for Margaret, illustrating a form of premeditated elder financial exploitation, one that relied not on force, but on the careful manipulation of trust, emotional bonds, and assumed authority. Margaret felt a mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief. The very foundation of her gift, her hope for familial unity and gratitude, had been weaponized, transformed into a tool to advance someone else's ambition at her expense. She realized that what was unfolding was not merely a dispute over property but a profound betrayal, where the invasion of her home symbolized a deeper disregard for her autonomy and intentions. In quiet moments, as she walked through the mansion's empty halls, Margaret contemplated the audacity of Rebecca's actions, recognizing the courage it would take to reclaim control without igniting a full-blown familial conflict. She considered how easily generosity could be exploited when someone possessed the cunning to blur lines between suggestion and entitlement, using charm and familiarity to disguise coercion. Margaret's mind raced through strategies, reinforcing security, documenting evidence of unauthorized visits, and confronting Rebecca in a way that left no room for rationalization or denial. Yet, even as she prepared for confrontation, she understood the delicate balance required to protect herself and her property while maintaining the semblance of civility, knowing that her reaction would set the tone for future interactions and could define the dynamics of trust, respect, and accountability within her family for years to come. The mansion, once a tangible expression of love and thoughtful planning, had become a stage on which Margaret could observe the true character of those around her, testing their honesty, patience, and respect for boundaries. Rebecca's unauthorized tours and manipulations served as a harsh lesson in vigilance, illustrating the subtle ways in which familial relationships can be strained by ambition and deception, and how a seemingly generous act can be turned into an opportunity for exploitation when boundaries are ignored. Margaret's determination grew steadily, fueled not by anger alone but by clarity, a recognition that protecting her autonomy and honoring the intent of her gift required careful action, measured responses, and an unwavering commitment to stand firm against deceit. Each instance of Rebecca's intrusion strengthened Margaret's resolve to reclaim the mansion not just as a property, but as a symbol of integrity, careful planning, and the sanctity of her choices, a sanctuary she would defend with both wisdom and fortitude, ensuring that her generosity could no longer be twisted into a means for manipulation or self-interest. In reclaiming control, Margaret realized she was not merely protecting walls and windows, but preserving the very essence of trust, respect, and honor that defines the relationships she cherished most, turning a painful betrayal into a lesson in resilience, vigilance, and the necessity of standing firm even in the face of calculated deception. Margaret had spent countless nights replaying the events in her mind, analyzing every interaction with Kevin and Rebecca, feeling the weight of betrayal but also recognizing the clarity that came with experience and grief. And when the moment of confrontation finally arrived, she approached it with a steady resolve, aware that the success of her plan to reclaim both her home and her dignity depended not on anger or impulsive reactions but on composure, preparation, and the quiet authority that had defined her throughout the years of managing her family and household. She invited Kevin and Rebecca to the mansion under the pretense of discussing the next steps for what they believed was their joint future, ensuring that every detail was arranged so that the environment itself reinforced her control. The rooms were open, well lit, and orderly, emphasizing that she was the orchestrator of this space, a subtle but powerful signal that she was fully aware of their schemes and ready to face them directly. As they arrived, Rebecca carried her usual air of casual entitlement, while Kevin attempted to soften the tension with a practiced charm, hoping to disarm Margaret with smiles and reassurances. Yet Margaret's gaze held a calm intensity that immediately shifted the energy in the room, making it clear that she was prepared to speak her truth without hesitation. She began by recounting specific instances of Rebecca's unauthorized access to the mansion, each example delivered with precise detail, including the days she had entered without permission, the conversations she had with neighbors and contractors, and the casual assumption that the house was already theirs, all laid out in a narrative that left no room for dispute or denial. A measured yet firm exposition that revealed the full extent of their manipulations while maintaining her dignity and control over the dialogue. Margaret spoke not from a place of accusation but from the certainty of observation and fact, her voice steady, carrying the weight of someone who had endured loss yet refused to be undermined, and she carefully contrasted her intentions for the mansion as a loving gift with the reality of their behavior, showing how the line between suggestion and entitlement had been crossed, how trust had been exploited, and how boundaries that were supposed to safeguard her autonomy had been repeatedly violated, all without allowing her own emotions to dictate the pacing or tone of the confrontation. Kevin tried to interject, framing their requests as practical concerns or emphasizing urgency, but Margaret anticipated every argument, responding with clarity and poise, demonstrating that she had considered every angle and was not swayed by pressure or feigned necessity, asserting that her gift came with conditions that had been ignored, and that the house was never meant to serve as a vehicle for manipulation, thereby re-establishing the framework of control that Rebecca had attempted to circumvent. The conversation moved through the mansion's rooms as Margaret guided them, each space serving as a testament to her planning and foresight. Her descriptions of how she envisioned the family using the house reinforced by concrete actions she had already taken to secure her investment, reinforcing the reality that the property belonged solely to her, and that any claims or presumptions of shared ownership were unfounded. Margaret's composure, her ability to interweave fact, emotion, and intent without losing authority, created an undeniable tension that gradually stripped Rebecca of her feigned confidence. Her carefully constructed narrative of inevitability and entitlement began to crumble under the weight of Margaret's meticulous documentation and articulate explanation. As Kevin and Rebecca realized that their attempts to manipulate and coerce had been fully observed and countered, a palpable shift occurred in the room, the atmosphere moving from casual familiarity and assumed privilege to the recognition of accountability and the inescapable truth that their schemes could not succeed in the face of vigilance and reasoned confrontation. Margaret established firm boundaries, clearly delineating what was acceptable behavior regarding the mansion, the rules of engagement for future interactions, and the consequences of disregarding her autonomy, all conveyed with a mixture of firmness and calm authority that left no ambiguity and required compliance without resorting to aggression or emotional outbursts. Throughout the discussion, Margaret maintained her composure, never raising her voice unnecessarily, never allowing frustration to dictate her words, and in doing so, she reinforced her own control, showing that authority stems not from intimidation but from clarity, preparation, and self-possession, a lesson in dignity and resilience that her family could neither ignore nor easily challenge. By the end of the confrontation, Margaret had successfully exposed the patterns of deceit, reasserted ownership of the mansion, and clarified the expectations for future interactions, turning a potentially volatile situation into an affirmation of her agency and foresight, demonstrating that generosity does not equate to vulnerability and that manipulation, no matter how calculated, cannot prevail against awareness and steadfast resolve. As Kevin and Rebecca left the mansion, subdued but aware that the dynamics had irreversibly shifted, Margaret stood within the space she had claimed not just as property but as a manifestation of her wisdom, careful planning, and unyielding commitment to her principles. The house transformed once again into a sanctuary of her making, a symbol of resilience, clarity, and the enduring power of standing firm in the face of betrayal, ensuring that her intentions remained protected and her generosity unexploited. As the dust settled from the confrontation, Margaret felt a profound sense of relief and empowerment, a clarity that only comes when one has faced deception head-on and emerged intact, stronger and more self-aware. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of both loss and hope, now stood as a tangible representation of her independence, her careful planning, and her refusal to let manipulation dictate the course of her life. In the days following the confrontation, she took deliberate steps to reinforce her boundaries, ensuring that Kevin and Rebecca could no longer exert undue influence over her decisions or her property, while simultaneously cultivating relationships with those who had demonstrated genuine care and integrity. Neighbors who had long admired Margaret's generosity and wisdom now became a network of support, offering companionship, advice, and friendship without any hidden agendas, a refreshing contrast to the tension and duplicity she had endured within her own family. Margaret also made it a priority to spend more time with friends who shared her values, people who respected her autonomy and understood the importance of trust, creating a circle in which mutual respect and honesty were the foundation of every interaction, reminding her that family is not only defined by blood but also by loyalty, empathy, and ethical conduct. In addition to strengthening her personal support system, Margaret turned her attention inward, reflecting on the lessons the ordeal had taught her and recognizing the critical importance of financial literacy and vigilance, particularly as one navigates the complexities of inheritance, property, and life insurance. She began to document her financial plans with meticulous care, seeking professional advice when necessary, and ensuring that her assets were clearly defined, legally protected, and free from potential exploitation. By doing so, she not only safeguarded her mansion and savings but also modeled a path of proactive self-protection for others, emphasizing that empowerment often begins with knowledge, careful planning, and the courage to act decisively when one's interests are threatened. Margaret even started holding informal discussions with friends and community members about the importance of recognizing early signs of manipulation and protecting oneself from financial abuse, sharing her own experiences in a way that was candid yet thoughtful, ensuring that others could learn from her journey without feeling judged or intimidated. As weeks turned into months, Margaret discovered a newfound joy in her home, embracing the freedom to curate her living space exactly as she had envisioned, hosting gatherings with friends who respected and valued her, and pursuing hobbies and passions that had been sidelined in previous years. Each room in the mansion became a testament not only to her late husband's legacy but also to her resilience, creativity, and careful stewardship, a personal sanctuary where she could exercise control and find peace without fear of interference. The sense of independence she cultivated allowed her to heal from the betrayal, transforming pain into clarity and frustration into actionable wisdom, reinforcing her belief that self-respect and boundaries are non-negotiable, even when it comes to family. Margaret also found it empowering to redefine her relationship with Kevin and Rebecca, limiting interactions to necessary communications and establishing clear rules about privacy, financial matters, and property. She recognized that maintaining distance did not diminish love or care, but rather ensured that the bonds between them could exist without coercion, manipulation, or resentment. In this space, she found a balance between compassion and self-preservation, demonstrating that it is possible to remain kind and supportive while protecting one's interests and values. Through this journey, Margaret embraced a larger perspective on life and relationships, understanding that trust is precious and must be nurtured but also vigilantly protected, that financial literacy is essential for safeguarding autonomy, and that wisdom often comes from learning hard lessons firsthand. Her story became a quiet inspiration to her community, a reminder that resilience is cultivated not through avoidance of conflict but through confronting challenges with grace, clarity, and strategic thinking. The mansion stood not merely as a home, but as a monument to her strength, her foresight, and her unwavering commitment to living life on her own terms, a safe haven where she could thrive surrounded by honesty, respect, and genuine care. As Margaret reflected on all that had transpired, she felt gratitude for the clarity the ordeal had provided, for the relationships that were strengthened, and for the personal growth that had emerged from adversity. The mansion, her friends, and her network of supportive neighbors were constant reminders that life could be both secure and fulfilling when approached with wisdom and intention. To everyone watching this story unfold, thank you for taking the time to witness Margaret's journey, a story of resilience, empowerment, and the importance of protecting oneself. And if you found inspiration or insight in this tale, please like, subscribe, and join our community for more stories that celebrate courage, wisdom, and the triumph of self-respect.